All right, let's jump straight in. In this explainer, we're unpacking one of the most complex, heavily debated, and honestly, deeply empathetic characters in all of epic literature. We're talking about Karna from the Mahabharata. If you know the epic, you definitely know Karna. But today, we aren't just skimming the surface. We're doing a deep, cinematic character study using the original texts to understand exactly why, centuries later, he still commands so much of our fascination.
Now you might be wondering, was the Mahabharata's most tragic figure a saintly hero or a complicit villain? Well, the truth is, the epic doesn't really deal in simple binaries. It doesn't give us a purely black and white world. Karna was a man who stood on the side of adharma, unrighteousness, yet he was a deeply righteous man himself. How exactly does that happen? Let's break down the three distinct dimensions of his character, starting with his undeniable greatness.
Section 1. Unshakable generosity and loyalty, the light of Danavira.
When we talk about Karna's virtues, we literally have to start right here with his absolute generosity. First, he's the ultimate Danavira, the hero of charity. I mean, he literally sliced off the divine armor and earrings he was born with to give to the god Indra, who was disguised as a Brahmin, fully knowing it would make him vulnerable to death. Why? Because he never refused a request, ever. Second, his absolute loyalty. When society completely shunned him, the Prince Duryodhana gave him a kingdom. Karna spent the rest of his life repaying that debt of food, even when he knew Duryodhana was dead wrong. And third, his unbroken vow. Before the war, he promised his birth mother Kunti that he would only ever kill Arjuna. Out on the battlefield, he actually defeated the other four Pandava brothers, shattered their weapons, and then he just let them go. He literally walked away just to honor his word.
His life was this devastating juxtaposition. On one side, you have immense, almost god-tier martial prowess. As we just talked about, he could disarm the greatest warriors of his age. But on the other side, a complete and total lack of social recognition. Because he was raised by a chariot driver, he was branded a Suta Putra, a lowly caste. His supreme talent was just constantly overshadowed by the relentless social stigma of his perceived birth.
And you know, this deep loyalty extended right into his rarely discussed personal life. He had two wives, Vrishali, his primary wife, from the charioteer community who stood by him through absolutely everything, and Supriya. But pay close attention to his son, Vrishakatu. Karna actually had 9 sons, but Vrishakatu was the only one to survive the horrific Kurukshetra war. And in this incredibly poignant twist of fate, once Yudhishthira discovered Karna was actually his oldest brother, he took Vrishakatu in. He raised him as his own flesh and blood, had Arjuna train him, and eventually made him a king. It's just a beautiful, heartbreaking postscript to his family life.
But we can't fully understand Karna if we only look at the light. Let's move to Section 2, Complex Moral Gray Areas, the Descent into Darkness. As much as modern retellings love to paint Karna as this flawless victim, the original text paints him as a vividly real, deeply flawed human being. Let's examine his darkest deeds and the psychological triggers behind them. First, the infamous Draupadi court scene. When she was being humiliated, it was Karna who cruelly called her a woman with 5 husbands. Why? Because of deep-seated vengeance for how he'd been publicly humiliated in the past. Second, the slaying of Abhimanyu. Karna joined several seasoned warriors in attacking a young, unarmed boy from behind, a stark violation of battlefield ethics driven by sheer desperation. And third, his intense lifelong rivalry with Arjuna. This was fueled almost entirely by his own ego and jealousy. He had this burning, obsessive need to prove he was better. He wasn't a purely white knight. His judgment was heavily clouded by his own trauma.
Which brings us to the core of his character arc. Section 3. A tragic hero's fate. The weight of destiny.
So you really have to understand how his life was a matrix of inescapable doom. Let's walk through it. First, the identity crisis. He actually had royal blood. He was the son of the sun god, but he was raised as a Sutaputra, so he suffered lifelong social ostracization for a birth defect that wasn't even real. Second, the agonizing clash between debt and dharma. To honor his gratitude to Duryodhana, he was forced to support true evil. And finally, the battlefield injustice. Cursed by his guru, cursed by the earth goddess, he met his end totally defenseless, trying to pull his stuck chariot wheel out of the mud, shot down on Krishna's command. His fate was literally sealed by systemic exclusion and divine curses.
And to realize just how tragic that defenseless death was, you have to understand his peak power. Enter the Vijaya Dhanush. Just as Arjuna had the Gandiva, Karna had the Vijaya, an invincible bow crafted by Lord Shiva himself and gifted to Karna by his guru Parashurama. Karna only used this terrifying weapon on the 16th and 17th days of the war, and as Lord Christian himself stated, as long as Karna held that specific bow, he was quite literally unbeatable by anyone in the universe. He didn't lose because he lacked skill. He lost because the universe itself disarmed him.
And this leads us to the climax of our explainer, the most profound dynamic in the entire epic. Section 4, the bond with Krishna, the ultimate philosophical test.
Picture this. Right before the war, Krishna takes Karna aside in his chariot to reveal his true identity. Krishna tells him, "You are Kunti's eldest son." Krishna is offering him literally everything he's been denied his entire life. If he switches sides, he gets the crown, Yudhishthira will serve him, Arjuna will be his driver, Draupadi will be his queen. It is the ultimate temptation. The universe is finally offering to correct the injustice of his life.
And here is Karna's legendary response. Duryodhana gave me a throne and recognition. If I joined the Pandavas out of fear now, it would be the world's greatest betrayal. He tells Krishna, when I was thrown in the river, it was the charioteer Adhirata and his wife Radha who became my mother and father, and when society rejected me, Duryodhana accepted me. He looks at the offer of an absolute empire and rejects it, choosing instead to march towards certain death simply because his loyalty to his adoptive parents and his friend was stronger than his desire for a crown.
But then, Karna makes one brilliant, absolutely staggering moral choice. He asks Krishna to swear an oath. Do not tell Yudhishthira who I am until I am dead. Why? Because Karna knows his brother Yudhishthira is a man of absolute righteousness. If Yudhishthira knew Karna was the eldest, he'd immediately surrender the entire kingdom to him. And what would Karna do? Well, because of his debt, Karna would hand the kingdom straight back to the corrupt Duryodhana. So, to protect the balance of Dharma, to ensure the bad guys don't win, Karna willingly chooses to die in anonymity.
And that brings us to the final, honestly tear-jerking test. Karna is bleeding out on the battlefield, his chest pierced by arrows. But he won't die, because the sheer weight of his lifelong good deeds, his dharma, is acting as a shield protecting his soul. So Krishna approaches him, disguised as an old Brahmin, and asks for alms. Having absolutely nothing left, Karna takes the blood oozing from his own chest, uses it in place of water, and officially donates all the merits of his righteous life to the Brahmin. He gives away his very soul's protection.
Moved by this unimaginable generosity, Krishna reveals his cosmic, divine Vishwarupa form and grants the dying warrior 3 final boons. First, Karna asks to eradicate birth-based discrimination so that no human being ever has to suffer the agony of the identity crisis he endured. Second, he asks that if there's a next life, he doesn't want to be a Pandava, he wants to remain a loyal friend to Duryodhana. And third, because he lived his life feeling like a social orphan, he asks Krishna himself to perform his last rites in a place of absolute purity. And Krishna honors this, cremating Karna with his own divine hands.
We're going to end with this incredibly powerful, provocative thought from Lord Krishna himself, speaking to the victorious Pandavas after the war. Karna is superior to you all, and even to me, in generosity and gratitude. He was a man who stood on the side of the villains, yet possessed virtues that made even God marvel. He was a product of a deeply unfair society, a man who made terrible mistakes out of trauma and ego, yet gave away his very life for loyalty. So I leave you with this to ponder. In a world that constantly judges us by where we start, what does it truly take to build a legacy that outlasts even the gods? Thank you so much for exploring the shadows and the light of this incredible warrior with me today. Catch you next time.